Hi, I'm Park Howell, and welcome to the Business of Story. Say, if you're looking for virtual storytelling training for your team of leaders, marketers, or sales folks, then I'm your guy. Most Zoom sessions are like Turkish prison visits, with everyone held captive behind their computer screens in their homes. But you know what? It doesn't have to be that way. My virtual events are interactive, entertaining, educational, inspirational, and will teach your people how to use the 3 proven storytelling frameworks that I teach, which are guaranteed to captivate their audiences and convert their customers. To learn more, go to businessofstory.com and click on workshops. And now on to today's show.
Digital PR is a lot like gambling. You're not going to win every time, right? While many people kind of wish content strategy and telling stories in digital PR were simple and that it's a short process, it's really not true. It can be a hard pill to swallow, but if you can help your clients understand that content marketing is a long-term strategy, I believe then everyone benefits.
Now, we're going to have so much fun today because we have Britt, Klontz, and Jaclyn Lambert, the co-hosts of the popular We Earn Media podcast, with us today. They are a ball, and they're going to share with you how you can use storytelling to place your clients' stories in media of all shapes and sizes. Britt Klontz is an independent digital marketing consultant. She specializes in digital PR, content strategy, and offers consulting, training, and workshops to agencies and in-house teams at companies of all sizes. Jaclyn Lambert is an earned media consultant as well. She has worked in an array of industries, including, but not limited to, personal finance, law, and home improvement since 2012. She's best known for building Student Loan Heroes earned media team, which later became part of a $60 million sale to LendingTree in 2018. Britt and Jackie will share their 3-step framework to successfully research, craft, and pitch your stories to the media, why content marketing is a long-term strategy, and the elements of every engaging story. Please welcome to the Business of Story, Jaclyn Lambert and Britt Klontz.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
So where are you two coming to us from?
You want to go first, Britt?
Don't be shy out there. You are the earned media ladies.
You go first, Britt. I'm second.
I'm coming to you all from Washington. So I'm near Seattle, about 35 minutes south of Seattle in a town called Auburn.
I know exactly where Auburn is. I grew up in Bothell.
No way. That's so cool.
I did. Yeah. Are you from the Pacific Northwest?
No, I'm
your
from
whole life?
Florida. Yeah. I actually got my wedding dress in a cute little thrift store in Bothell.
No kidding.
Yeah. I love it there. It's so cute.
So you went clear across the country, and Jackie, I know you're in Gainesville, Florida, right?
Yeah, I just moved a few inches north on the map. We met in Tampa, though. Britt and I used to work together we met in 2012 at a digital marketing firm.
Mm-hmm.
Long time ago.
And were you two always in the PR world?
Yeah. I mean, Britt studied sorry, I'm talking for you, Britt, but I know that she studied something slightly different in school. But as far as I know, you've been in PR your whole career, haven't you, Britt?
Yeah, digital PR and SEO and content marketing, all the worlds collide there. So that's my background. And I studied communications. I went to school for radio, television, and internet media, which they threw internet into my degree in my junior year. So I was thankful for that. And yeah, so I got an internship at a boutique digital marketing agency, a very small one. I fell in love with it. I decided to not become a journalist and pursue PR instead.
And so you two are the host of WeEarnMedia.com, the podcast We Earn Media. How did that show come about?
Oh, I got to take this one, Britt.
Yeah, go for it.
It all started one day. I had just finished working with a journalist at Lifehacker on a piece that she was working on in which my client was a source for that story. Interestingly enough, what I had pitched her originally was for an entirely different story. But as what happens in many PR cases, I happened to be at the right place at the right time. Basically, I hopped into her inbox when she needed an expert in the industry that I was pitching. And so we ended up working on an entirely different piece. The week that that story went live was a particularly slow week for me. So I was feeling a little down on myself, which I'm sure if anybody working in digital marketing, they're no stranger to feeling a little bit like, I guess, feeling all the ups and downs you feel, because not every week can be a perfect week, obviously. A lot of unpredictability in our careers. And actually, this is a good lesson in relationship building with journalists, too. I kind of took the approach in responding to her story by opening up about my imposter syndrome. I'm sorry, my cat is meowing in the background. Can you go away?
Oh, that's fine. That brings a little ambience to the whole show.
Yeah, and there was probably a cat meowing in the background during my talking to this journalist. But anyway, I opened up to her and said, "Thank you so much for working with me. I have to admit this came at a good time because I was feeling a little down on myself this week." And I basically just opened up about my imposter syndrome. And I think people who excel at media relations know how to build rapport with journalists. And there's a fine line to cross. I mean, you don't want to tell them that you know what they ate for lunch because you spied on them on Instagram and Twitter. But if you can kind of relate to them emotionally, it helps. Anyway, she opened up to me about her imposter syndrome. And I thought that was really sweet because, oftentimes when you're down in the dumps about something and you think that you have it worse than everyone else in the world, you often forget that emotions are universal. And so for me, it felt nice to know that journalists, the people that I am constantly begging things for, also feel a lot of the same pressures that we do. So Britt, who is also freelance, just like I am, we do like these weekly calls together and we just kind of, excuse my language, but shoot the shit, because I don't know how else to say it. But we talk about our challenges and our successes. And I told Britt about this and she chimed in saying, "Oh my God, like, wouldn't it be cool if we brought these conversations to life and started a podcast?" What started as kind of a not half joking kind of idea turned into something very real. And we kind of ran with it, started emailing our contacts that we had good relationships with. And a lot of them took to that idea, got on the show, and we've been told it's like a therapy session for journalists. So it's kind of exciting.
I was going to say, what is the point of the show, or what is the main theme of We Earn Media?
Do you want to go into that, Britt? I've talked a lot and I want people to hear your voice too.
Sure.
Quiet, shy Britt up there in Auburn, Washington.
The whole point of the show is to really tap into the minds of the journalist and understand what kinds of stories they want to tell and how can we be better collaborators in the world of digital PR. Especially when I got into digital PR, it was super intimidating. I mean, the first thing that my boss told me to do on my first day of my internship was, "Hey, we produce this infographic on how to build an online resume, and we want you to place it on Mashable." This was back in 2010. I had no idea what I was getting into, but once I got into it, I was like, oh, this is a lot more challenging than it was framed to be. The point of it is going back to how it's intimidating. If you get sucked into Twitter, you'll see a lot of tweets from journalists and even a lot of articles written about annoying PR people pitching crazy stories that make no sense to what they talk about or to what they write about. They don't tie into it at all. While you can be as careful as you might, can be when it comes to pitching stories, it's still really intimidating. And we wanted to kind of also take away that intimidation factor and
Yes.
show that the journalists who we're writing emails to are people as well. They're a lot more understanding than you think, as long as you approach them with a story that speaks to what their target audiences and readers want to read about, and B, that it's not too self-serving for the client or, the brand that you might be pitching the story for. So that's the main gist of the podcast, is figuring out what kinds of stories they want to be pitched, and also how to pitch them, how to connect with them, and how to have a collaborative, productive relationship with people who are writing these stories.
Gosh, when I started out way back I graduated in 1983 and 84. I got a degree in music composition theory, but one in journalism with a public relations emphasis, because I figured I could make money as a communicator and maybe not as a composer. Anyway, I was remembering my internship at the Feary Group, which was a prominent public relations firm in Seattle, Pat Feary and her husband, Jack, and just salt of the earth, smart people, extraordinarily well connected. And I worked with a good buddy who has been a good buddy ever since, Rob Malinowski. He had graduated a year or two ahead of me, so he was the AE there that I reported to, and I was the grunt intern and just trying to absorb as much as I could. And we had this one client, Bella Norte, out of Los Angeles. And Pat Feary, for whatever reason, said, Park, this is your client. Now, remember, I haven't even graduated yet. I was an intern. And my job was to pitch Bella Norte to the local TV station King 5 for their morning show. The story, so I called up, and I believe the lady's name was Terry. She was flying up to Seattle to do the show, and I interviewed her and got their brochures and whatever. And what I heard and what I dug up was a pretty fascinating story, I thought. Bella Norte did undergarments and camisoles and that sort of thing for women, but they would go to antique stores and they would find this old vintage fabrics and all kinds of things and create these one-of-a-kind fashions out of them. Nothing came from new, material. It was all vintage relic type stuff, which I thought was kind of an interesting story. I mean, totally out of my realm, right? Here's a guy trying to graduate from college and I'm selling, negligees basically. So I pitched the story. They really liked it. The show producer said, yes, bring him up. So Terry flies up from LA, and with her a model. Now, Terry was bigger than life, both stature-wise and personality-wise. And as soon as she came out of SeaTac Airport and I picked him up at the airport, and she had this model in tow, this wispy little beautiful thing that was going to be wearing, the creations on the show, she just started just needling me and having fun at my expense. And I was just this quiet little shy intern dude. And we get over to the show, get him in there, and she's bigger than life. The producer comes out and she's like smiling like, oh, this is going to go really well. Get her on the show. Model walks out in one of their creations, and the host asks her about where do they find all these vintage fabrics and whatever. And she says, these aren't vintage fabrics.
Oh, no.
And the producer looks right at me like, what the? And I'm sitting there going, huh? I mean, that was the whole point of the show. And so everything that they were waltzing out in were not vintage fabrics. And that show producer was so pissed. I was completely mortified. She actually looked at me and said the famous words, you will never work in this town again, basically. No. And I went back to my PR firm and Pat Feary, and I told her what happened, and Pat just laughed. She goes, oh, yeah, that show producer, she's not a very kind individual. I'm not sure what happened with the client. Don't sweat it, Park.
You do have to have a thick skin.
Well, you do. And I learned something. You've got to fact check it. Your clients may tell you one thing and it may not be the truth.
That's true.
Or you are so excited to pitch that show that did I fabricate something? Did I make it cooler than it actually was? I don't really know what the answer is to that. Maybe a combination of both, but boy, did I learn you have to be careful when you're pitching out there to make sure that you do have all your facts straight. That was, I think, my first indication that probably I wasn't going to have a career in public relations.
All right. So that's interesting. I'm going to plug our podcast because we have an episode similar to that with worse intentions than you, Park, because you had the right idea. You just maybe didn't fact check. We actually have an episode. It's the Casey Bond episode. Casey is a journalist with the Huffington Post, and she writes about personal finance. Are you familiar with HARO, helping a reporter out? Do you know what that is?
Yeah, that's that online site, isn't it, that you can register and then you just see what they're looking for, right?
Exactly. So anybody who's interested in digital PR should sign up. HARO. I don't think it's haro.com, but if you Google it, you'll be able to find it. And you basically get a newsletter 3 times a day, and it's journalists looking for sources for their stories. Anyway, Casey kept getting responses from a woman named Patricia Russell, who claimed to be a CFP, which is a certified financial planner. Through a little sleuthing, she found out that Patricia Russell was a fake person, and she ended up doing a whole investigative piece basically around this company where their whole PR strategy was around creating a fake persona. So there's lesson number 1 for your audience. Don't create a fake persona to storytell in your in your PR efforts, because it will go very ugly. It's happened quite a bit, more than you would think.
You will be found out.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Especially now in the age of, I hate saying it, but fake news, reporters are doing the very best that they can to make sure that what they're reporting on is credible and fact checked to the T.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing.
Yeah.
You know, I'm with you about being hesitant about saying fake news because you don't want to call everything fake news, but there is an awful lot of fake news out there online and, you know, in the regular media, even coming out of the White House. So we all have to be extraordinarily diligent on what is real and what's not real. And you can't blame the public for not trusting anybody anymore.
Yeah, it's true.
This word storytelling is batted around all over the place. Everybody is now a storyteller and storytelling this and storytelling that. And what I have found in my travels is while people talk about storytelling, they don't actually do it. They still think they're telling a story, but they are just going on with features and benefits and functions and blah, 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 and generalized information without telling a story about a moment in time, about an individual, about a real world impact. How do you two define storytelling in digital PR?
Oh, man. I'm going to let you tackle this one, Britt.
Okay.
I have examples.
Oh, wow. She totally punted, huh?
Yeah, I know. I'm like, definition. I was like, oh, shoot. I'm going to let Britt define. I got the examples, though. So you just wait. You're going to have your socks blown off. Trust me.
Well, I've got my sandals on, so I'll keep an eye on those.
Oh, my God. Careful. Those things, they can really fly.
All right, Britt, what do you got for us?
I define storytelling in digital PR as, it's a good question because I think there's a lot of answers and there's a lot of different ways to convey storytelling in the line of work that we do. I think the most important thing to remember when it comes to storytelling for PR is that you have to try to make the story emotional, timely, and easy to remember. That's probably the simplest way to sum it up. We do have a framework that we wanted to go through, and I guess maybe that could help explain how we approach storytelling. So maybe I'll dive into that.
Cool. Yeah.
Digital PR is a lot like gambling. You're not going to win every time, right? While many people kind of wish content strategy and telling stories in digital PR were simple and that it's a short process, it's really not true. It can be a hard pill to swallow, but if you can help your clients understand that content marketing is a long-term strategy, I believe then everyone benefits, because storytelling in digital PR can be so hit or miss. But there is a framework that we use for coming up with PR-driven content marketing campaigns. And it's actually one that stems from my time at Distilled, which is an SEO agency where I spent, I think, about 4 years of my career at. That framework is called the Relevant, Resonant, and Different Method. So I guess you could kind of call it maybe like RRD if you were looking for a short and sweet acronym. But just to dive into what that means, relevancy refers to 2 factors, and that's credibility and concreteness. When determining whether or not an idea or a story is relevant, I tend to ask myself, A, how does this fit with the brand offering or messaging? Because that's super important, right? To keep, you have a story in mind, but you want to make sure that it's credible coming from whoever brand it's coming or whatever brand it's coming from. You want it to avoid seeming too self-serving, making sure that it's not pushing their products and the services that they sell or offer. But also at the same time, which is a huge challenge, you want to make sure that the story is appealing to the brand's target audience. So how does this fit in terms of brand values and tone of voice, but also appeal to the audiences that we're trying to tell the story to? And that's quite the challenge. But if you have an idea that does that, you're on the right path. And then resonance, that relates to the emotional aspect. So is it a shareable story? So you want to ask yourself when analyzing an idea, for example, what evidence do we have to suggest that people really care about this topic? When they see the, story pop up in their news feed, or, maybe they actually go to an outlet and read the content that they're publishing that way. What evidence do we have to suggest that people really care about this topic? What's going to make them want to share it with their friends and family on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, maybe even, or LinkedIn, I guess? And what evidence do we have to suggest that the publishers cover this topic too? That's really important as well. Doing that background research to identify what topics the journalists care about that you're pitching the story to.
Can I ask you, Britt, right there with this, because that resonance thing is going to require an awful lot of research. How many hours do you think you put into a pitch of doing your research first to figure out what's going to be right and for whom?
That's a good question. So when I start working with a client, I try to do a content strategy if the budget is available from the get-go, to understand the outlets that we're going to be pitching our content to, and to also understand the brand better. So the research component of that, it can take a long time. Yeah, I've never really measured it. Again, it's always like, how much budget do I have? Okay, then here's the amount of hours that I can put towards doing this research. But yeah, that's actually ongoing research, believe it or not, too, because one of the biggest tips I can give to other PRs or even people in the content marketing sphere is to just continue digesting and consuming popular content, and just the content that's being published by the outlets that you're going to be targeting. So honestly, that research is ongoing. So it's hard to put a number on how many hours.
Britt makes a good point of constantly being in the know and constantly reading, because I guess this falls more under the relevant category, but that's constantly changing. It kind of is maybe a little more concrete, unless your audience is wildly changing. But I kind of have a question actually about resonant Britt. Britt is more organized than I am. I'm more fly by night, but it's great because when she shared this framework with me a while ago, I'm like, okay, cool. I'm glad there's a name for something that I do. This is a really great way to look at it. Britt, can you talk about the emotions in resonant a little more? Like, if something makes you sad, if something makes you angry, what about happy? Like, how do you determine if something really is gets at people's emotions?
I guess this is where my sleuthiness for just lurking on social media comes into play, because I try to think about, okay, if somebody comes across this story, will they look good sharing this? I mean, that's kind of what encourages people to share content on social, right? They want to look like they're sharing something that they believe in, maybe, or they want to share something that resonates with something that they're passionate about. So I try to just think about, would someone look good sharing this? So it's very vanity.
That's a great way to look at that. Wow. I hadn't even thought about that. Okay.
I love that personally. And the reason why, at the Business of Story, been doing this 5 years. We had 270 shows.
Wow.
And over the last 6 months, I have been inundated with boilerplate pitches of people that have no relevance. And the person pitching them wants me to do all the heavy lifting.
Of course.
Here's who they are. Here's their background. You can listen to them on a couple of these 3 shows. There's one sheet. And then, we're ready to book them whenever you like. So I've got to do all the work. And that idea about, am I going to look good sharing this? Yeah, it's ego-driven, but it's really about my listeners. Do my listeners give a crap at all? Do I think they're going to care? And I can tell you, 99 out of 100 of those, I don't even pick up the phone. I don't follow up with, because I get so frustrated at it. I got one 2 weeks ago where the lady sent me 4 guests in one pitch.
Oh, God. So she's
with
desperate.
links to all their stuff that she wanted me to go and do all the digging. And it spurred in me this need to do a show, which I did with Tom Schwab from Interview Valet, show number 263, because I was so frustrated. I got Tom on the phone and we did a whole show about this. And so when the three of us got connected, I thought, well, here's another look then at how people pitch. And Britt, I'm totally with you on that resonance. Will your guest make that author, make that person sharing it, make that podcast host look good, their show sound great, and be an asset to the listener?
Right.
And my answer is, if any one of those is a no, do not pitch them. Am I right on
Definitely.
that?
Yes. That kind of reminds me of a client that I work with sometimes. I can name drop her because she likes publicity. Leslie H. Tain, Esquire. She's a financial attorney. She does a lot of podcast appearances, and she relies on storytelling to actually work with publishers. And there's a couple of ways in which she does that. So she's a debt lawyer. And so she actually went through her own issues with debt management. She was a victim of what's called financial abuse. I forget what it's called, but when you, I guess, default on loans, she can resonate really with her target audience very well. And we communicate her story and the pitches that we write to the media, basically baking that into her biography. So not only is she an expert in this field, but she's also struggled with it and has been where the audience is, which is really great. In terms of podcast research, I would say it takes at least an hour, if not more, to craft these individual pitches for every little show. That sounds like it could be a little unreasonable from a PR person's perspective, because if you spent like over an hour with every pitch that you write, you would just never sleep, I guess. One way we combat that, and it might be helpful for your audience, is we do have like in our back pocket multiple stories that we keep like in a document. And then when it comes to doing the research on the individual show, it's so much easier because you've already done a lot of the legwork and you've done some initial research and what is quote unquote resonant and potentially relevant. The next piece is just researching that show you want to be on and figuring out where you can fill the gaps. And then what that turns into is I might grab from that sheet that has the ideas that I had preformed, and maybe I kind of change it slightly to be more appropriate for the show. And then maybe I add to the brainstorming list as I learn more about, what's out there. So.
And it plays off of, I think, something Britt said earlier, too, that any really good earned media professional out there is constantly digesting information, has the pulse on what's happening, who's writing about what, where the story's happening. So you presumably already have this landscape of relevance, and when you've got a brand that can plug into something. So maybe it's a brand that's doing something really big with Black Lives Matter. Mm-hmm. And it's in a particular area of the country, and of a media person, a digital person that is covering that specific issue, but you've been paying attention to it. So and can take advantage of those opportunities when they happen right away versus just shotgunning pitches out there in hopes of getting something.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a build up. You build up to it too. It's nice when you have multiple clients in the same industry, but if you're in-house, it applies to you too. But the longer you do it, the more buildup you have, it becomes a lot easier. It becomes almost like second nature. So don't give up if you're just getting started. It's a lot of work at first, but.
Do you guys have industries that you specialize in? So you become like a go-to resource for those industries?
I have in the past. For quite a few years, I worked for a company called Student Loan Hero, and they were in the personal finance industry. I ended up getting a lot of contacts in that space. When I eventually left and went independent, I was able to get a few personal finance clients. It becomes a lot easier because you already know people, but I don't find it a barrier to working with other industries. It's just you might have like a slight leg up. But now, I guess I'm in the home improvement space now with a couple of clients that I'm working with. And I guess with the financial lawyer, I'm still trying to keep tabs with the personal finance industry. Right. How about you, Britt? Because you have an agency background.
I've
so
dabbled in all different kinds of industries due to my agency background. And now I've been doing my own thing for what has it been now? Since November. So not even a year yet. I still have clients in a variety of different industries. I also partner up with agencies as well. So yeah, I don't specialize in anything yet. I dream to maybe one day do so and maybe one day even go in-house somewhere. But yeah, still just bouncing around all the different industries. And it's fun though. I put different hats on.
I ask that because we often have agency experts on here, Drew McClellan, for instance, and Michael Gass. And we always talk about in the agency world that it's the specialists that really are making hay, especially during this time, because clients want to go after a specialist and help them. They're not looking for that generalist agency. And I was kind of just curious if that's also true in the earned media world.
I will say in my experience, the easiest clients I've landed have been in the personal finance industry, just based off of my prior experience. I think it probably depends on the industry, but the personal finance industry is it's huge, but it's a little insular. Things are starting to sprout from this, but there's this one community called FinCon. At one point was the one conference you would go to if you wanted to be successful in the personal finance industry. And this is true for journalists, bloggers, and PR people, marketers. As you could imagine, community forms around these kinds of things. And I would say that a lot of the personal finance people I've worked with, they like to work with each other. So it can be advantageous. And I'd say the other advantage to specializing, not only does it make it like in digital PR, A, the outreach is easier, but B, I think the storytelling becomes a bit easier to be like authentic, I guess, because you kind of end up diving a little deeper than you usually would, especially if you're like in-house and you're like having to come up with ideas like every week and every month. You're going to eventually go so niche that, it's bound to happen. So I could see that being true. I do like the agency life because that's where I started out with. And I think the one thing that those generalist people have a leg up on is that they learn how to be hustlers and how to be really scrappy with it's, I think, the ability to kind of have to use different parts of your brain and put on different hats. Like there's a quality there that I think, I don't know, they're both great.
Yeah.
I guess is what I'm trying to say in their own ways.
We'll be right back with Britt and Jackie to learn what that third element is in their digital storytelling framework. But first, I want to thank all of you who have left such great reviews on Amazon for my new book, Brand Bewitchery. Here's a shout out to filmmaker and business storyteller Andrea Cadelli, who writes, Park's new book is an excellent resource for anyone who wants to craft your own spellbinding brand stories using his story cycle system. He provides numerous real-life examples and case studies to demonstrate how his framework has helped companies large and small connect in a more powerful way with their customers and influence results. Park's authentic writing voice and personal anecdotes make this book a fun and highly educational read. It's a hard one to put down once you start it. Thanks, Andrea. I appreciate you sharing your thoughts on Brand Bewitchery. Now, I gotta admit, it's kind of embarrassing for me to sit here and read all these swell words about my book, but I figured, what the heck? It might be the only way to get these reviews in front of you. Unless, of course, you go to Amazon or Apple Books to pick up your print, Kindle, or ebook copy of Brand Bewitchery today. Leave a review, and who knows, you might even get on the show too. Now, even though Brand Bewitchery was written to help you clarify your overarching brand narrative and teach you the elements on how best to tell it to captivate your customers and convert them into action, if you happen to be in the PR or earned media world, you can use the book to the principles within it to help you become even more successful in landing big-time stories for your clients. So check it out. Okay, let's get back to the show with Britt and Jackie and learn about that third element in their digital PR storytelling framework. Now, I want to get back to the framework, Britt. We covered your first two, relevancy and resonance. What was the third?
Oh, yeah. The third one's the most important part. So I'm glad you came back to that because I definitely got
I didn't want to lose you in all this.
The third part of it is different, and that relates to simple and unexpected. So when deciphering whether or not a story or an idea that we're putting together for our clients is going to work, quote unquote, we have to think about whether or not it's different from what's already out there. And also how, if it is different, how does it still add value, or how does this difference add value? One thing that we come across often are studies on millennials, right? So maybe you have an idea on how millennials are, this is very generic, but how millennials are spending their money. And, there's tons of reports out there on ways that millennials are spending, by shopping online and spending their money in various ways. So, to make it different, what can you, even if that's the case, what elements can you add to the story to make yours stand out? Maybe you can incorporate some trending topics, something that's really timely, which goes back to the other parts of the framework, right? It goes back to resonance and also relevance as well, because you want to understand how can you make, or you want to make sure that it's timely, because, if you're talking about millennials spending money, for example, and because COVID is on everybody's mind right now, and you do want to incorporate questions that cover that. And that could make it different if that research isn't already out there. It is at this point. But, if this were months back, that could be a really stellar idea, because you are reporting on a topic of interest that's at the top of everybody's mind right now. And even though this research has been done in the past, you're including a new element to it.
You're trying to find a different angle, a different way to tell the same story, that people haven't heard. So it's a little bit more distinctive, and say, oh, yeah, we'll cover that because nobody has in that particular light.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Jackie, do you have an example for us?
So I work with a company that, I think due to reasons I can't necessarily say out loud, but they basically are a moving services company. And so you can go log on their website and book movers. Annually, we come out with what we call the migration study. And we basically tell the story of where Americans moved in the last year. And I think that as a standalone story is pretty unique in that the competitors aren't necessarily doing it to the same level that we are. I mean, they're basically using their proprietary data and laying it all out there, which I think takes a level of vulnerability that automatically sets you apart from other people not willing to do that. So that's a good lesson in itself. But in terms of what the new angle is, obviously when COVID hit this year, things are a little different. And we were wondering, well, what story can we tell right now about what's happening? And I think a lot of PRs are struggling with this idea right now with COVID, because it's kind of like all the plans we had for 2020, basically, it's not just in real life, but it's also in a lot of the plans of marketers and PRs are just out the window. And it's starting fresh and figuring out like, okay, the media doesn't even know what they're covering next. Like, how are we going to keep up and help them? And we came up with the COVID migration study that we just released. And I'm really excited about it because it's the same story we tell every year, but the difference is we're looking at it through that new normal lens. I would say people are now paying attention to migration patterns more now than they were before, because I mean, there's a lot of elements there. There's judgment, like why the heck are people moving? Some people might kind of scoff at the idea of people being so migratory, but B, there's a real element there too of like being able to relate to that. It's like, okay, we found that a lot of people are moving because they don't feel safe where they live or they can't afford where they're living now. And
in your study, are you seeing them moving out of dense, metropolitan areas and moving out to the burbs and even further?
Yeah, we're seeing people move out of New York City, LA, Miami, Chicago, I believe, as well, and moving actually right near where you are, Arizona. So we're finding people are not necessarily abandoning big cities altogether, but maybe moving to big cities that have a little more to offer in terms of space and privacy and nature. So Arizona was a big state people moved to. Idaho, which I found interesting, but somebody told me recently that Idaho has actually some beautiful vacation spots. So I think people are just trying to hide out during the pandemic.
Jackie, you have to get out of Gainesville.
I need to go.
Idaho's very beautiful.
Yeah, exactly. From Gainesville to Idaho.
Keep inching north. Yeah. Idaho has many beautiful places up there. Panhandle in particular, Lake Pend Oreille,
That's what I heard.
Sandpoint, Lake Coeur d'Alene. Yeah. They just have those winters that you got to put up with, but it's very beautiful. But I've heard the same thing. Now I'm in Phoenix, and my wife and I have been building a home up in northern Arizona long before COVID. And it's been taking forever because it's like hillbilly contractors up there. So we hopefully will be in October. But this community that we're building in up there, this time last year, you would drive around the community and there were quite a lot of for sale signs. And it's a bedroom community, it's cabins, it's people in the summertime escaping the heat, and you can get up there, up on the Mogollon Rim. So it can be 114 here in Phoenix and literally 78 degrees up there in an hour and 50 minutes. It's just that amazing. But I can tell you that you drive around that community now. I was just up there last weekend. I think I saw 3 for sale signs.
Wow.
They say homes are being snatched up in like 2 hours, 3 hours, not even going on the market. And when you drive I-17 between here and Munns Park and into Flagstaff, it is busier now than I've ever seen it. So I think we're experiencing that migration thing happening here too. So not to get sidetracked, but that's an interesting story. I'd never thought about that. I'm experiencing it, but with you now talking about it, I say, yeah, that's a very relevant news topic at the moment.
It's pretty cool. And it kind of goes to what Britt said. It's like, okay, a migration study is nothing new. In fact, we release them annually and it almost becomes like whatever.
Yeah, it's like big deal.
Big deal. Yeah, we do it annually, and we get some press around it. This is, particularly with the states that are experiencing people moving there, because obviously that's newsworthy. I mean, and it's kind of cyclical too. I love this framework because, we were talking about, well, what's the new angle we can bring about to it? Well, we just named something that's relevant. So it brings us right back to the beginning of this, but it's all kind of, works together. The story also resonates because you even just talked about your own experience. I bet you everybody's got some sort of example of how the idea of moving during the pandemic, somebody knows somebody who's done it, or they're noticing people are either leaving or, populating where they're living. So, yeah.
All right. So let's wrap up this show with going through the framework one more time: relevancy, resonance, and difference. So I would like to throw this question out to both of you. What are 1, 2, or 3 things that a listener could do right now? And maybe they don't have a PR firm. Maybe they don't have an earned media professional like yourselves, but they want to pitch themselves either to be on a podcast or to get some more visibility. What are a couple, 3 things people should think about and do the next time they're preparing and sending that pitch?
Number 1, I would say, is look to your leadership, particularly your CEO or president, founder, whoever might be on top, and what is their personal story in relation to that brand. And what I mean by that is at Student Loan Hero, our CEO dealt with student loan debt, and he, I think, defaulted on some too. I know a lot of debtors in this life, but we were able to, and we had that story in our back pocket, and we utilized it constantly when we were first starting out and telling our story to the media. A lot of people wanted to know Andy's story, and they did a lot of features just on him alone. Leslie Tain is another good example. She's a lawyer who also works in the personal finance industry, has had her own trouble with debt, and utilizes that story. It doesn't have to be related to the personal finance industry. It's whatever industry your CEO or founder works in. And there's a good chance that they probably have some story if they even bothered to start a business in that industry to begin with. So think about that and see if you can borrow from that story alone. Secondly, you're going to want to familiarize yourself with the media that is out there. Obviously, mass media, we're talking CNBC, Forbes, whatever. Those are really fine and dandy. And you'll find that a lot of writers write under specific topics and that your industry will likely align with some of those topics that writers write about. Just start familiarizing yourself with those works, who the players are there, and following them on Twitter. But also don't hesitate to start looking at niche sites. And so you'll find that there's going to be a lot of hobbyists out there who have these mid-sized blogs and these podcasts that might not have 1 billion listeners, but they have a lot of people who are passionate about the topic. So just start familiarizing yourself. And then lastly, Don't be afraid to send that first email. Our podcast talks a lot about how to set a pitch up, but I could tell you right now, imagine a pitch that's about no more than 3 paragraphs long, depending on what you're pitching. Personalize it, make it clear that you are familiar with whoever you're pitching's work, and pitch them a story idea and how you can fulfill that story idea. So if you want to be on Park's podcast, for instance, don't lead with who your person is. Why don't you lead with, actually, Park, your framework fits in beautifully here, talking about presenting the problem and the solution. You talk about that. What's the name of that?
ABT, the ABT, the and button, therefore.
Yeah.
Yep.
Looking at that and figuring out a way to use that in a pitch. So setting it up, telling your story that way, and then saying, my client can fulfill that, and here's how. Let's get on the show and talk. And so I would say those are my 3 main takeaways, but there's a billion things you could honestly do to get started. What do you have, Britt?
I would say, especially with speaking to the reporters and journalists on We Earn Media, trust your gut. And don't be afraid to push back in a polite way, of course, on your clients. You're going to come up against clients sharing story ideas with you. Sometimes they're going to be amazing, and I always encourage my clients to do that, right? Tell me what you're focusing on, and share with me some of the challenges that you're facing in your business. Share with me all the little fine details, because I can help you come up with stories. And if you have a story idea, share it with me. But don't be afraid to tell them if you don't believe the idea is going to stick. That's really important. You're the expert, and as long as you articulate why it's not going to stick, they should respect and believe your opinion. So don't be afraid to push back, and that's something that a lot of journalists were telling us too. Another thing is just exactly what you said, Jaclyn, micro influencers and those more niche outlets. They're not going to be comparable to Forbes and CNN and all of those top tier national outlets, but they're going to have really engaged audiences and people who are, when it comes to pitching stories to blogs, for example, I've seen so much more referral traffic coming from those tinier news sites, because those audiences are more curious to actually look at, say, if it's a survey or a report on migration studies, they're more keen to follow through to that link and go to your client's site and then read into it some more, because they're maybe more curious about that specific topic. Why else would they be on a blog about a very focused subject? Because they're more interested in following through and reading it on your client's website. So that's that's what a lot of our clients come to us and say, we want to be on the Wall Street Journal, we want to be on the New York Times,
we want to be on Oprah.
Yeah, Ellen. And that's all fine and dandy. But
that would be nice, honestly, if I could.
Yeah, I would have the producers on speed dial.
Right.
But don't discount the little guys. It's still very important. Also, from, not to get nerdy and SEO and stuff, but from a link building perspective, you want to have links pointing to your site from various factors and types of websites, not just the top tier ones, because that's going to also look a little bit shady and unnatural. Yeah. So you want to have a more natural backlink profile. Go after the little guys, long story short. Those are 2 additional points. And I think that with what Jackie mentioned as well, those are the main things that I would recommend people getting into PR focus on and think about.
And as you go after those micro influencers or those smaller shows, a la The Business of Story, listen to an episode or 2. Get to know the hosts and what the hosts care about. Understand their listeners as best you possibly can, and don't bug them unless you actually have a guest that will become an asset for the show.
Right.
That's my last pitch.
One thing I'll say too, to mention, one last thing, not only listening, but also do a quick Google search and make sure they haven't covered almost an identical story, because that happens.
Yeah, I get that too, because in 270 shows in, we've covered a lot. I even have friends go, haven't you kind of just covered the whole story thing?
Yeah.
But I find there are so many different cool, interesting angles to how people use story that it even surprises me. But it does take some digging. So I go out and find my guests as much as, or really more often than they find me. However, occasionally I will get just that stellar guest that someone will have pitched me with an angle that is really, really interesting that I hadn't covered before. But those are few and far between because simply the PR firms and the pitchers aren't doing their homework.
Yeah, it's hard. Not to defend not doing your homework, but I can see why people fall into that trap. They want to do shortcuts because they have probably the pressure of a client or a boss saying, oh, I want this and that. So they fall into that numbers game. But I'm telling you, it's not worth it. You got to just slow down.
You know, ladies, and I've been at this a lot longer than you have, so I'll give you my 1 point of advice on that for the rest of the listeners. In my business, and I ran an agency for 20 years, and I've been in my career for 35 years. Every shortcut I took in business led me to disaster faster. Oh, just remember that.
Love that.
I swear to God, I have never, ever had a shortcut work for me.
Yep.
It's always blown up in my face. So unfortunately, people, you just got to do your homework. It's just the way it works out there. And yes, there is pressure, undue pressure put on everybody, but there are no silver bullets. It just takes the effort to do it right. And then that way you're in service to not only your client who's paying you, but to the writer, to the journalist, to the podcast host, to the TV personality whose people you are trying to serve.
Gosh, we could do a whole other episode on that alone. I mean, Britt brought up a good point earlier, too, about pushing back. You know, a client might not want to, get on air and tell their story or whatever it is. It's the same thing with results, like setting up expectations and really being forthright about what is realistic.
Yeah. No, you're exactly right, because they want to get on Ellen, even though apparently she runs a microaggressive
we don't want to be on Ellen
production
anymore.
crew or something.
Thought about that since I mentioned.
Poor Ellen. She's so nice and friendly and happy. How could that possibly be going on in the background?
I know. I'm blown away, man. All our heroes one by one, I guess.
I try not to put any celebrity on a pedestal these days.
Yeah, you really can't. You really can't.
Yeah.
Right.
That's for sure. Well, Jackie and Britt, thank you so much for being here on the Business of Story today. Just a real pleasure speaking with you.
Yes, thank you for having us, Park. It was a pleasure, and I love talking about storytelling, so it was fun.
It really was. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you all for listening to this edition. Take this to heart if you're out there and you're trying to pitch yourself. A lot of you I know are solopreneurs, and you don't have that boss to go to. You are the boss. But Britt and Jackie make such a great point to tell your story, your authentic story, because that is what is interesting to people. You probably went through something really hard. Mm-hmm. You scrapped your way through it. You came out of the other end. And you said, I'm not alone in this. There are a lot of people that have this same problem, and you started a business around it.
Exactly.
And that is so cool. And that's the story people want to hear.
It really works.
It's baked into our brains, So if you like this episode, share it with someone you know. Share it with friend, family, colleagues, whatever, to help them get a better idea about how to storytell as they are pitching, and you are pitching your stories into the digital world. And if I can help you, come on over to businessofstory.com, where I've got 270 plus episodes of brilliant story minds like Jackie and Britt. And of course, if you haven't purchased my book yet, Brand Bewitchery, check it out on Amazon, get a print and Kindle version. And by golly, they finally got it up on Apple Books, so you can get it there as well. I'm very excited about that. And don't forget about our complimentary course that goes hand in hand with that book on Thinkific. Visit businessofstory.thinkific.com. That course, it's really a tutorial more than anything. It'll take you by the hand through the story cycle system, which will help you dial in your brand story. But while you're doing it, you will also be taught the story frameworks of, as we mentioned earlier in the show, the and, but, and therefore, to help you focus your message, the 5 primal elements of a short story to help you make really big impact in the world, and of course, the story cycle system to not only clarify your brand story, but also to use it for your long-form storytelling and presentations, white papers, blog posts, whatever. That's waiting for you over at Thinkific, businessthestory.thinkific.com, also covered in Brand Bewitchery. And with that, I would like to remind you to join me next Monday. And until then, remember that the most potent story you'll ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make it a great one. Thanks so much for listening.
Good job, Park. That was awesome. I'm so impressed. We have a lot to learn. That was cool.